There are phases in life when, if we look only at the surface, it is easy to assume that everything is going off course. These are the times when heartfelt plans fail to take shape as expected, when relationships that once felt like anchors suddenly begin to fracture, and when all the quiet efforts you pour into the world seem to go unnoticed. Amid all of this, a deep exhaustion slowly settles into the mind. You feel drained from trying so hard, while reality appears frighteningly unchanged. When faced with moments like these, our natural reaction is to doubt ourselves and assume failure. We begin to torment ourselves with thoughts that we chose the wrong path, that we have fallen behind the world, or that we have somehow lost our golden opportunities. Yet the depth psychology of Carl Jung opens a completely different and surprisingly hopeful perspective. According to Jung, the periods when a person feels most lost are often the very moments when the psychological structure of the self is undergoing a profound reconstruction in the deepest layers of the unconscious. If you wish to understand why adversity often signals the approach of a major turning point, stay with this reflection a little longer. What follows will reveal a perspective that very few people recognize while they are standing in the middle of their own personal storms. 1. Crisis is restructuring you. One day, in the middle of an ordinary and seemingly calm life, you begin to feel a quiet but powerful shift within. What once felt familiar now seems distant, and even your most certain plans start to feel fragile. A strange awareness arises. You sense that you are crossing a boundary, and life will not return to the way it once was. In everyday language, people call this a crisis. But through the lens of Carl Jung's depth psychology, it is not a collapse. It is a signal that the old structure of identity is cracking, making space for a more mature and integrated version of yourself to emerge. Why do these transitional periods frighten us so deeply? Our survival instinct naturally pushes us towards stability and away from pain. When a relationship ends, we rush to fill the void. When work becomes overwhelming, we try to escape. When emotions feel chaotic, we attempt to control or suppress them. Above all, we want to return to safety as quickly as possible. Yet the paradox is that the very phases we try hardest to avoid are often the moments when life is quietly asking us to transform. The collapse of familiar structures is rarely accidental. It happens because the person within you has outgrown the limits of your past life. When the old shell can no longer hold the deeper version of who you are becoming, tension and rupture are inevitable. Jung observed that much of human suffering does not come from hardship itself, but from clinging to an outdated identity while the inner self has already evolved. As he once reflected, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." This sentence reminds us that events do not define us. It is the way we rebuild ourselves from those fragments that ultimately shapes our destiny. Jung called this sacred journey individuation, the path through which a person becomes their true and authentic self. This process rarely unfolds in comfort. It usually begins when adversity forces us to pause and confront our inner world. When life is smooth, we rarely question ourselves. Only when familiar structures collapse through loss or a lingering emptiness do we ask the deeper question, what am I truly living for? In that moment, a new kind of inner strength begins to emerge. Not power over the world, but the ability to remain steady in uncertainty and patient with unanswered questions. Jung believed painful experiences serve an essential purpose. They push us to face the hidden parts of ourselves, the shadow we once ignored. Crisis does not simply break the old life apart. It begins to reveal who you truly are. Imagine a vast forest after a great wildfire. Among the ashes and devastation, there exist certain seeds that can only germinate when activated by the intense heat of the flames. The human psyche works in a similar way. The most devastating shocks and losses often become the very heat required to awaken potentials we never knew we possessed. The fire does not only destroy the old, it clears the way for an entirely new ecosystem to emerge. Even so, this process is painful, because our ego has been built from habits and long-standing social roles. When these structures begin to shake, we feel completely disoriented. Yet in Jung's view, that instability is evidence of growth. When the old no longer stands firmly, the mind gains the space necessary to open itself to new possibilities. Crisis, therefore, is a reconstruction from the foundation upward, forcing us to re-examine our deepest values and find the courage to step beyond the only path we once believed existed. When you begin to rebuild yourself, not only does your vision of the world change, your understanding of who you are also transforms. That is the true beginning of inner transformation. If these words resonate with something within you, stay with this reflection a little longer, because next, we will explore a remarkably subtle signal, one that quietly reveals that a new chapter of your life has already begun to unfold. 2. Real change always begins from within. Every genuine transformation in human life does not originate from dramatic external events, but from a quiet shift within the mind. There are moments when, in the middle of the familiar rhythm of daily life, you suddenly realize that you are standing at the threshold of something new. Interestingly, these moments often bring confusion rather than excitement, because they rarely appear in dramatic form. There is no shocking event and no clear date on the calendar, announcing that everything has changed. Instead, the transformation begins with a subtle shift in the way we observe ourselves. Because of its quiet nature, many people dismiss it as a passing emotion, unaware that the smallest shifts in awareness often become the seeds of the greatest turning points in life. In truth, when your awareness changes, your life begins to move along a different trajectory, even when outward circumstances appear unchanged. Carl Jung's depth psychology explains this phenomenon with remarkable clarity. Human development does not unfold primarily through external circumstances, but through movements within the deeper layers of consciousness. When you begin to see yourself through a new lens, your entire system of thinking and decision-making gradually transforms. This means that the major turning points of life rarely begin with changing your job or location. They begin with redefining the self. In one of his most powerful reflections, Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This statement reveals a vital truth. Much of what we call destiny is simply the influence of hidden psychological forces operating within the unconscious. When a person begins to bring the light of awareness into those shadowed areas, they do not merely understand themselves more deeply, they begin to take hold of the steering wheel of their own life. To illustrate the power of this inner shift, consider the story of Lily. She came to speak with me not because her life was collapsing. From society's perspective, Lily had a good career and stable relationships. Yet she was haunted by a persistent sense of emptiness she could not explain. Every morning, she woke with the same thought repeating in her mind. The life she was living no longer reflected who she truly was. Lily had once believed deeply in the path she had chosen, but over time the achievements that once brought joy began to feel like burdens. Nothing dramatic had happened. Everything had simply begun to feel misaligned. Lily's experience is not unusual. It is the echo of the process Jung called individuation, the journey toward becoming one's most authentic self. This journey does not begin with impulsive decisions, but with subtle tremors in awareness. When you begin questioning old values and listening more carefully to your inner voice. For Lily, the unease she felt was not a failure, but a sign that her inner life had grown beyond the frame of her current circumstances. She began asking questions such as, "What truly makes me feel alive? And am I pursuing what I want, or what others expect of me?" Lily's transformation did not happen overnight. It accumulated through the smallest of actions, learning to listen to her emotions, learning to say no to what drained her, and allowing herself to consider possibilities she had once ignored. These small steps gradually formed a profound turning point, because when awareness changes, behavior changes. When behavior changes, choices change. And when choices change, an entire life can begin to change with them. True transformation does not arrive from the outside. It emerges from the deep understanding of who we are. Yet there remains an even deeper layer within this journey that few people recognize, a layer that ultimately shapes the person you will become in the years ahead. 3. How have you become a different person? Growth rarely appears as a triumphant victory. Instead, it often arrives disguised as a strange and difficult-to-name feeling of unfamiliarity. One morning, while reflecting through the mirror of your usual thoughts, you suddenly realize that the person standing there is no longer the same individual you were a few years ago. Pressures that once kept you awake at night now seem small. Goals that once pushed you to run relentlessly no longer ignite the same longing within you. Deep inside, a quiet question begins to echo. When did I change? This shift does not occur in a single fleeting moment. It is the result of hundreds of small experiences accumulating over time. Bitter disappointments, conversations that forced you to rethink your beliefs, and moments when you gathered the courage to confront the raw truth about yourself. Gradually, these experiences reshape the way you perceive the world. And when perception changes, the essence of who you are also begins to move along a different trajectory. Yet there is a truth that few people recognize. Feeling unfamiliar with your former self is not a sign of being lost. Rather, it is evidence of genuine growth. In Carl Jung's analytical psychology, the human being is not a fixed entity. For much of our lives, we operate within what Jung called the persona, the social mask. This mask is how we present ourselves in order to meet the expectations of family and society. While the persona helps us belong, it can also deceive us into believing that the mask is who we truly are. Jung left behind a profound insight. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. The greatest privilege of a human life is not found in titles or external achievements, but in the journey of shedding borrowed layers to return to your authentic self. The moment you begin to feel misaligned with your former version is precisely the moment when that journey truly begins. Pay attention to the small changes. If you once exhausted yourself trying to please others or chasing society's definition of success, you may now notice a quiet shift within. You begin to realize that not every form of recognition is worth your energy, and relationships maintained out of obligation start to feel heavy. This stage can feel confusing. When the old skin has been shed, but the new one has not fully formed, you may feel suspended between two realities. In Jungian theory, this is a natural part of the individuation process. Growth does not mean becoming colder. It means becoming clearer with yourself. As your inner values realign, what no longer belongs in your life will naturally fall away. You are not becoming negative. You are simply seeing life with a deeper awareness. According to Jung, when we begin separating ourselves from the persona, we reach deeper regions of the psyche that we have never touched before. You are not becoming a stranger to yourself. You are simply returning to the place where you truly belong. This transformation requires tremendous courage, the courage to let go, to release roles that once defined you, expectations that once drove you, and sometimes even relationships that once seemed indispensable. Within this act of letting go, a new form of freedom quietly begins to grow. You realize that life does not have to be a continuous race. You start to choose more carefully what truly deserves your limited energy. In that moment, your inner state becomes calmer, wiser, and more authentic than ever before. One of Jung's deepest insights becomes clear. We do not mature by adding more roles to ourselves, but by removing the masks that no longer fit. Yet behind this process of letting go lies an even deeper transformation, one that may cause you to see your entire life journey through a completely different lens. Stay with this reflection a little longer, because the next part will reveal why life sometimes closes certain doors in order to open the path toward a new destiny. 4. Life's way of forcing you forward. The moment a door in your life closes often happens quietly, without warning or dramatic signals. One day, you simply realize that the path in which you once placed all your faith has suddenly come to an end. A relationship breaks apart. A career opportunity slips away. A carefully built plan becomes impossible. What hurts the most in such moments is not merely the loss itself, but the feeling of being rejected by life. Standing before a blocked path, our natural reaction is to question our own worth. We ask ourselves where we went wrong and why our persistent effort did not bring the results we hoped for. We quickly label it as failure. Yet when viewed through the lens of Carl Jung's depth psychology, closed doors are not always punishments. Sometimes they are life's compulsory interventions, forcing us to leave a journey that no longer aligns with our inner development. There is a profound truth that few people recognize in that moment. When a door closes, it does not merely end an opportunity, it also cuts off the path back to your old self. Imagine a ship setting sail toward the open ocean. If its anchor still clings tightly to the harbor, the ship will always retreat to safety whenever the waves grow rough. Only when the anchor line is severed, when the old escape routes disappear, do we finally find the courage to move forward. Jung observed that inner growth rarely occurs in comfort. It often begins when a person is pushed out of familiar structures, when the old ego can no longer maintain stability. Ironically, that very disorientation creates the opening through which deeper layers of the psyche begin to unfold. As Jung once reflected, "No tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell." The height of the soul's growth is always proportional to the depth of its suffering. For a tree to reach the sky, its roots must be brave enough to descend into the darkness of the soil. Human beings are no different. We only develop profound awareness when we pass through phases in which our former values collapse. Why then does life close the doors we most desperately wish to keep open? From the outside, it may seem like the cruelty of fate, but in Jung's process of individuation, this is the psyche's way of discarding choices that do not originate from your authentic nature. Because human beings instinctively cling to familiar paths, circumstances sometimes have to forcefully push us away before we are ready to leave. Interestingly, the meaning of those closed doors often becomes clear only with time. Like a path in the forest, some roads appear wide and promising, yet lead to dead ends. while narrow and shadowed trails may guide us toward entirely new landscapes. Those barriers force you to discover potentials you never imagined you possessed. They compel you to reconsider how you see yourself. When you lose an opportunity, you re-examine your values. When a relationship ends, you gain clarity about the true needs of your soul. The pain you feel when a door closes often comes from your own resistance. A part of you still longs to return to the familiar safety of the past. But growth begins the moment you accept that the old road has ended. In that acceptance, new possibilities appear, possibilities you may never have considered before. Life may not immediately lead you to where you want to go, but it will always guide you toward where you need to go in order to become whole. In truth, what you are now calling a collapse may simply be the first preparation for a profound transformation. 5. The signs that you are stepping into a new chapter. There are phases in life when, although no dramatic event seems to happen on the outside, you can feel from deep within that a powerful shift is taking place. It is not a sudden decision, but a quiet transformation in the way you interpret the world. The anxieties that once consumed your mind suddenly begin to fade. Arguments and competitions that once pulled you in no longer seem appealing, and in their place, a strange stillness appears, as if you are standing at the threshold of an entirely new reality. These moments often feel confusing because they do not carry the clear shape of a turning point. Yet it is precisely within these subtle movements that a new chapter of life is beginning to form. True maturity does not begin with dazzling excitement, but through a change in the way you respond to life. For many years, you may have been living in survival mode. When a person endures prolonged hurt or instability, the mind automatically builds defense mechanisms, vigilance, suspicion, and the need to control everything. These mechanisms are not wrong. They may once have been the very thing that saved you in difficult times. And yet, here lies an important paradox. The armor that once helped you survive the past can become the very barrier that prevents you from stepping into the future. When life begins to open new opportunities, those old reactions may unconsciously cause you to slam the door shut. A part of you is still waiting for the worst to happen, which leads you to doubt genuine affection or to control every small detail just to make sure everything does not fall apart again. In Jungian psychology, the most important shift occurs when a person begins to recognize that these unconscious patterns are directing their behavior. As Carl Jung so powerfully expressed, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This sentence contains a core truth. The moment you begin to see your automatic reactions, you have officially stepped out of the old cycle. Instead of being ruled by fear, you begin to pause and observe your emotions. Instead of stubbornly trying to control everything, you accept that some things are beyond your reach. And instead of living in doubt, you allow yourself to experience life with a new kind of openness. This is the shift from a survival mindset to a growth mindset. When we live to survive, the mind is focused on avoiding loss. But when we enter a new chapter, the focus shifts toward creating meaning. You no longer ask how to suffer less, but begin to ask, what truly matters to my soul? Another subtle sign of this stage is the ability to let go of the need for control. This does not mean becoming passive, but developing trust in the flow of life. You begin to understand that not every surprise is a threat. Sometimes, it is a doorway leading to places beyond imagination. According to Jung, when a person becomes aligned with the deepest parts of the psyche, they begin to live with greater flexibility and no longer feel the same compulsive need to force the outer world into submission. The final sign, and perhaps the most important, is inner peace. This is not peace because every problem has disappeared, but because you have come to understand who you are and the path you are on. That peace is proof that you are no longer living in reaction to the ghosts of the past, but are beginning to live in order to create the future. However, this new chapter often comes with another challenge for which few people are truly prepared. This quiet transformation requires a complete break from the old mindset. If you feel that you are standing at this threshold, stay a little longer, because the next part will reveal why we cannot step into a new life while still carrying the broken fragments of an old survival mindset. 6. You cannot step into a new life with the past mindset. At the important turns of destiny, people often begin to recognize a subtle but undeniable change. The way we respond to the world is no longer the same as it once was. The noise that used to pull you in now feels like distant static. Invitations you once accepted without hesitation now make you stop and reflect. In those quiet spaces, a new awareness begins to crystallize. You can no longer continue living by the old rules for even one more moment. This shift can feel unfamiliar because in the past, you may have been someone who constantly adapted. You may have strained yourself to maintain every relationship so that no one would be disappointed, grabbed every opportunity out of fear of being left behind, and tried to control every variable in order to prevent old wounds from reopening. And yet, after major upheavals, a new instinct begins to rise. You become more selective. This is not coldness or selfishness, but the natural result of finally understanding the finite nature of your time and personal energy. Here, we encounter an important psychological paradox. The mechanisms that once helped you survive your stormiest seasons are the very things that now prevent you from entering a more peaceful chapter. When living under pressure or in pain, the mind automatically creates a survival mindset, a state of constant alertness and a desperate need for control in order to prevent collapse. Although this mindset once served as an effective shield, carrying those same outdated reactions into a new season of life is no longer appropriate. Carl Jung warned about the persistence of unconscious patterns when he said, "What you resist not only persists, but will grow in size." This statement reminds us that psychological patterns, if not brought into the light of awareness, will continue to govern our lives like a false fate. If you do not recognize these outdated survival reactions, you will unconsciously recreate your past inside your future. Sophia's story is a vivid example of this transition. There was a time when Sophia lived inside an overloaded schedule, constantly trying to please everyone, and treating exhaustion as the inevitable price of success. Only when a major life event forced her to stop did she realize how much of her life force had been wasted on things that were never truly important. Her change did not come through a dramatic decision, but through small choices, learning to say no to toxic relationships, glamorous but empty invitations, and opportunities that were only appealing on the surface. True maturity is not about doing more. It is about clearly recognizing what is no longer necessary. In Jungian psychology, this is the process of separating oneself from the persona, the social mask we have worn for far too long. When the mask begins to fall away, you start returning to the deepest core values of the self. Those around you may perceive you as distant or changed, but the truth is that you are not moving away from life. You are simply becoming closer to yourself. Each person's energy is limited. When you stop scattering it on meaningless things, you finally create enough space to nourish what is truly valuable. Stepping into a new life means carrying out a profound clearing, letting go of old habits, old expectations, and even relationships that no longer fit who you are becoming. And it is precisely in that spaciousness after letting go that a new way of living begins to grow, a way of life, no longer governed by the fear of loss, but guided by wisdom about what truly matters. 7. Choosing what is worthy of your energy. At a certain point in the human journey, we suddenly come to understand a fundamental truth. The most valuable possession we have is not time or external opportunities, but our life energy itself. It is the pure, vital force with which we think, build, love, and keep moving forward. The moment this awareness awakens, a quiet revolution begins within the mind. Events that once seemed necessary to attend begin to feel meaningless. Relationships that once consumed enormous emotional energy begin to be examined through a sharper lens of inquiry. Is this truly worthy of my energy? This awakening rarely emerges in comfort. More often, it is the result of being refined by adversity. Only after painful losses, after escaping toxic relationships, or after rising again from what once seemed like irreversible collapse, do people finally realize a deeper truth. We may lose many things, but the strength to begin again still lives within us. It is from the ashes of loss that a very special form of inner power is born. There is an interesting psychological paradox here. The fear of loss often pushes people to cling tightly to everything, but only after going through collapse and realizing that they can still survive do they truly touch freedom. This freedom is not a passing emotional high, but a profound structural shift within consciousness. When the fear of failure no longer occupies the driver's seat, the way you live changes completely. You no longer say yes just to soothe other people's expectations. You no longer maintain meaningless habits, and you stop chasing glittering things that are empty beneath the surface. This change may surprise the people around you and may even be met with resistance. But in truth, becoming deeply selective about what is allowed to enter your life is a sign of advanced psychological maturity. In Jungian theory, this is a vital part of the individuation process. As a person gradually separates their authentic nature from social pressures and masks, they no longer crave external approval as if it were a sedative. Jung left behind a classic reflection: the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. In order to fulfill that privilege, we must learn to cut away what is no longer in harmony with our essence. True freedom does not come from trying to control everything, but from placing complete trust in the strength of recovery that already lives within. Once you know that you can remain standing after any storm, you no longer feel the need to cling to temporary lifelines. You become willing to let an opportunity pass if it is not right for you, willing to refuse toxic relationships, and brave enough to leave roads that have lost all meaning. Imagine your inner world as a garden. A garden cannot flourish if every plant is allowed to grow wildly and crowd the space. When too many things compete for light and nourishment, no seedling can reach its full potential. A wise gardener understands that unnecessary branches must be pruned so that the life force can flow into what matters most. Human life works the same way. When you stop scattering your energy on too many superficial pursuits, you create space for the most important seeds to grow. This selectiveness does not only change the way you live, it also redefines the way you see yourself. When you understand that your worth does not depend on being everywhere or pleasing everyone, you begin to feel a strange and beautiful peace. You move from the mindset of living to avoid loss to the mindset of living to flourish. Your true value does not lie in the number of things you do, but in the quality of what you are brave enough to keep. And yet, once you have learned the art of protecting and directing your energy, life will present you with a new and more subtle challenge. Whether you are truly ready to receive the good things, the peace, and the success that are now moving toward you. 8. Learning to receive success, peace, and opportunity. After a long journey through loss and hardship, just when you finally begin to rise again from the fragments of past struggles, life suddenly opens before you with new and promising horizons. Healthier relationships begin to appear, career paths start to move more smoothly, and a sense of peace, once something that felt distant and almost unattainable, quietly enters the rhythm of your life. Yet strangely, at that very bright moment, a curious paradox emerges. Instead of embracing it with joy, your mind becomes cautious and uneasy. Perhaps you have experienced this feeling before. When things begin to improve, you find yourself doubting their stability. When a valuable opportunity appears, you feel the need to control every detail for fear that it might slip away. And when genuine affection comes into your life, you maintain a certain distance, as if waiting for something to go wrong. These reactions are not signs of weakness. They are the lingering echoes of survival mode, a defensive mechanism deeply rooted in the subconscious after years of storms. At this point, however, a new realization must emerge. The most difficult lesson after enduring hardship is not learning how to fight in order to survive, but learning how to open yourself in order to receive. In Carl Jung's depth psychology, inner maturity does not end with confronting the shadow. It also involves reconciling with the parts of ourselves that have already healed. Jung believed that true psychological development occurs when a person becomes whole, no longer driven by outdated patterns of fear. He once reflected, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart." Clarity in life does not come from attempting to control the external world, but from understanding the depths of your own heart. When you truly know yourself, life begins to move along a corresponding path. Opportunities that align with you and relationships that reflect your true values begin to appear naturally. Why then do we still struggle to accept peace? The answer lies in the comfort zone of tension. When someone has lived too long in instability, the mind begins to treat chaos as something familiar. When calm finally arrives, it can feel strangely foreign. True maturity requires stepping across a new psychological threshold, learning to enjoy good things without gripping them with fear. Consider the story of Helen. She came to me not because she was failing, but because she was confused by her own stability and success. After many years of relentless work and emotional upheaval, when life finally began to soften toward her, Helen found herself feeling anxious. She had become so accustomed to preparing for disaster that she no longer knew how to simply live in peace. This is precisely the pattern Jung described. We unconsciously recreate tension just to maintain what feels familiar. Only when Helen realized and accepted that she was worthy of good things did she truly begin to live. Imagine your mind as land that has endured a long drought. When the first rains finally fall, the dry earth cannot absorb the water immediately. It needs time for each layer of soil to soften and gradually receive the nourishment. The human ability to receive joy works in much the same way after long periods of emotional dryness. When your mindset changes, your life inevitably begins to change as well. Success and happiness no longer appear as distant achievements, but become the natural breathing of a soul that has discovered inner balance. Yet at the very moment you learn how to receive, you are also entering the final stage of transformation, one that requires an entirely new perspective on the present moment. The moment that changes your life does not lie somewhere in the distant future or in a sudden stroke of luck. The truth is quieter than that. Life only truly turns a new page when your inner self has matured enough to step into the next chapter. The hardships and losses you have endured were never meaningless. They were a silent process of refinement, teaching you to understand your true self and strengthening you so that you could hold the peace that once felt beyond your capacity. Because of the darkness, you have become the version of yourself capable of receiving the light. Trust that your destined moment is not waiting somewhere ahead of you. It already exists within the transformation you are experiencing right now. If these reflections have touched something within your soul, please share this message with others walking the same path, and subscribe to the channel so we can continue exploring the deeper layers of personal transformation together.